like to thank you and the ranking member for bringing these bills up to be heard today. I'd like to speak specifically about the bill that's jointly co-sponsored with Representative Sarbanes, Representative Scott, and myself, the Chesapeake Bay Science, Education, and Ecosystem Enhancement Act, better known as the Chesapeake Bay Sea Act. Incredibly important for not only the Chesapeake Bay and for the states bordering the Chesapeake Bay, but for the nation. As you know, the Chesapeake Bay is a national treasure. Incredibly important ecologically, one of the most diverse ecosystems on the face of the earth, not just the bay itself, but all the tributaries there. And I've worked professionally for years as a scientist working on Chesapeake Bay issues involving seafood and the health of the bay related to potential pollution sources. So I've gotten to work hands-on in the bay watershed for a number of years. It's an incredible ecosystem. This bill reauthorizes the Chesapeake Bay Office of NOAA. And Mr. Chairman, this is indeed a place where there's a federal role. You know, you can make an argument about state programs and the delineation between state environmental programs and federal environmental programs, but this one is where there is a clear need for the reauthorization of Chesapeake Bay Office. The reason being is that the bay covers multiple states, 6 states to be exact. And we all know that if we don't do things in unison to make sure that water quality controls, whether it's point or non-point source, are done uniformly throughout the bay watershed, then the impacts indeed affect everyone. I would argue disproportionately affect those states that are down the watershed. Virginia, being way down the watershed, unfortunately suffers the impacts of what happens up the watershed. For me, I live it. I worked growing up on the Chesapeake Bay. My son is a commercial waterman on the Chesapeake Bay. I hear from him almost on a daily basis about the things that he sees and experiences on the bay, whether it's crabs, which he harvests, whether it's oysters, which he harvests, or finfish. So all those things are incredibly important for us to make sure that we are coordinating the efforts in putting in place the proper controls for non-point source pollution and for point source pollution, and make sure that there's a coordinating effect to make sure the playing field is level. Everybody needs to be doing equal work in not only conserving the bay, but also cleaning up the bay. We have a ways to go. The Chesapeake Bay at one time was the most productive water body on the face of the earth. Now listen, I understand with 18 million people in that watershed, we're not going to get back to that point where it was when Captain John Smith came over. But I do believe this. I believe we can get the bay back to where it was in the middle portion of the 1900s. And that is still an incredibly productive water body. The way we do that is through bills just like this, through the Chesapeake Bay Sea Act, to make sure we're coordinating with states, with environmental requirements in states, with federal Clean Water Act requirements, with the NOAA program office, to make sure that those things are happening in unison. So I'm really happy to see this bill, which would reauthorize the Chesapeake Bay office, reauthorize those incredibly important elements of the program, especially the education and training programs, not only for students of a young age in the Bay watershed, but across the nation, to understand how incredibly important the Bay is. And it is indeed an economic engine for the states within the watershed. So we want to make sure we're doing all of those different things. So again, I want to thank my colleagues, Representative John Sarbanes from Maryland, Representative Bobby Scott from Virginia, as we work to make sure this bill gets signed into law. And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you providing the opportunity today for this bill to receive a hearing and for folks to understand how incredibly important this piece of legislation is. I would argue not just to the region, to the Middle Atlantic region, but to our nation.